but I want to spend a little time on volunteer best practices. We also, as you move forward, our volunteer services staff will continue to be a resource to you if you're encountering any challenges, if you have any questions about how to proceed with the clients you're working with. You'll see this information again, and we're always around to answer questions. So a broad overview of best practices. We work to empower your client, manage expectations and navigate differences, and practice trauma-informed care. So I'll get into a little bit what that means. Empowerment. The nature of working with refugee clients is that we can imagine that folks have experienced, significant trauma and significant hardship. However, when working one-on-one or in small groups with the clients, we talk about visualizing refugees through a strength-based lens. I'll sort of use the example of working as a career mentor because I believe that's what you both expressed interest in, although I can use other examples as well. You may start out by asking your mentee about their long-term career goals, their short-term career goals. What are their experiences? What are their career experiences? What are the skills that they think they're strong at? Not focusing so much on hardship and deficits, but on strengths and goals moving forward. We encourage you to do tasks with your client partner rather than for them. That may be searching job boards together, presenting a resume template, and then filling it in with experiences together, again, rather than for them. We don't match up volunteers with any clients under the age of 18, so you'll be working with adult clients. Even if you don't necessarily understand your clients' decisions, we're never in the place to impose. We always respect our partners' decisions. With that, it's going to be important to be aware of the power dynamics at play. These are clients in a new place, working with a mentor who they may experience as having, some significant hand in their future. So it's going to be important to avoid asking questions that the client may feel challenged but obligated to answer, and not to assume any knowledge about their background. I think also the majority of challenges that arise that we hear about between clients and volunteers are a product simply of unclear boundaries and expectations. So our staff also will help you out with an initial meeting where we'll do some realistic goal setting, very clearly discuss the specific role of the volunteer, and we'll facilitate a discussion to set clear boundaries so that no one has any sort of outsized expectations of the partnership that may get tricky later. It says here, and this is important, if questions or requests that are outside of the scope of your role as a volunteer arise, then it will be time to return to those boundaries. And you can always let our volunteer services staff know if you're experiencing any difficulties or you're struggling with the boundaries of the partnership, and we can always advise and step in if necessary. In this here, we'll talk a little bit about cultural humility. It's going to be important not to assume any knowledge of your partner's background or experience, but rather to let their own speaking on their experiences be the only impression that you're developing, hopefully. In the next slide, I'll show a little bit of a reflection on our own cultural biases that may be helpful. Your role may involve helping a client adjust to cultural norms in the US. Part of cultural humility is conveying respect for their home culture and patience as they adjust to cultural differences in the US. I think a good example of this is, and one of the most frequent issues that we hear arise, although, you know, I don't want to set any expectation that this would happen to you, but it does happen with some frequency, is we set up volunteers and clients for mentorship, and then we hear that a client may be consistently late or struggling with communication and go incommunicado for a little bit. There's sort of a natural tendency, I think, for all of us to take that very personally, to think, well, this person doesn't respect my time and they haven't made a priority of this weekly meeting that we have. We want to really encourage you not to take that personally, to start from a place of empathy, that imagining that this is someone who has just arrived to a new country, is in an extremely challenging position, facing likely language barriers and cultural barriers, and adjusting to an entirely new way of life. In addition to that, our cultural competency and cultural humility we may be reminded that, for example, expectations of timeliness are not the same all over the world. This may be not a sign of disrespect in the culture that they're coming from, but just, you know, a totally different perception of time and timeliness. So always, of course, if you ever have any concern that the client you're working with is not doing well, that you've had trouble getting in touch, that they seem to be struggling, always you can come to the volunteer services staff and we can have our staff step in and check in on them, make sure they're doing all right. We want to ensure that that never escalates to conflict or butting heads, because this may simply be an issue of differences in cultural expectations. Maybe a helpful reflection, and we can send this around later if that's useful as well. And we don't need to go through all of this right now, but in those moments, I encourage you to walk through sort of your own set of cultural biases that we all have. What are sort of the preconceived notions I have about my clients' cultural groups? What are my biases? What are the consequences in my relationship with this person, etc. Okay. And finally, we're sort of getting to the end of best practices here. Trauma-informed care. Not all refugees have experienced violent trauma, but all refugees have experienced some degree of trauma due to their displacement as refugees. So we strongly encourage a method that we call trauma-informed care. We also worked last year with a group of graduate students at Columbia, and they put together for us a additional training on trauma-informed care that's much more detailed than this. And it's really a fantastic resource that I'll send around after this, so you have all that, and we don't have to go through all of this today. There are 4 principles of trauma-informed care. That's safety, trustworthiness and transparency, mutual collaboration, and empowerment and choice. So what safety looks like in a mentorship role is both physical and emotional safety. That may be avoiding deeply personal questions that may be triggering or re-traumatizing to clients who have experienced great hardship. Trustworthiness and transparency. We'll have, before we connect you with any clients, we have all of our volunteers sign a confidentiality agreement, which is a very simple sort of one-pager, but lays out our expectations of confidentiality, that our volunteers, as well as our staff, don't share any personal details with other community members or online about our clients, and that really helps to create a safe environment in our client volunteer partnerships. Trustworthiness also entails that volunteers will try to create as much consistency as possible in the life of a refugee client, which may be extremely tumultuous at the moment. It's incredibly helpful when our volunteers can provide consistent communication, are reliable as much as possible in terms of meeting times and behavior. Mutual collaboration, that essentially just means that we let the clients take the lead in goal setting and decision making. They're adults and they're the experts in their own experiences. So whether that's in English tutoring, in career mentorship, we let our clients voice their needs, express their goals, and then follow their lead. That goes hand in hand, finally, with empowerment and choice. Again, our clients are adults and they have the power to choose their own for themselves in every way. And we may not agree with every choice that they may make, and still it is their choice to make. Finally, we have many volunteers who become incredibly close with their volunteer mentees, which is, I think, really special for all involved, or it has the potential to be. And you may get to know one another very well. Still, it's important to remember that in this role, you are not authorized to act as a counselor or therapist. I think there may be sort of an inclination to take on a role like that if a client chooses to share with you challenging and personal information. But it's going to be important, first of all, not to express any entitlement to that kind of information, to not press for it. It's their choice to lead if they choose to share that, and to be respectful and listen. But if you have any concern about the safety or mental well-being of a client, it's important to get in touch with Common Point staff who can take next steps and intervene as necessary, but you should never feel the need to do that as a volunteer. Circling back again, maintaining confidentiality. I'll send over a little one-sheeter that has all this information, but it's going to be important never to share a client's personal information with others unless given express permission by your partner, and certainly not to share any information or photos over social media. On volunteer practices, on a completely different note, we're switching gears. We'll ask, once you get connected to a volunteer opportunity, that you keep track of your hours. That really helps us out when we're reporting our impact. That should be relatively simple. For many of our volunteers, that looks like 2 hours a week. My colleague Danny on the volunteer services team periodically checks in with volunteers, the main goal of which is to see how you're doing, see if you have any concerns or questions, and those will be opportunities to share your hours. For next steps, if after all of that information you would like to move forward with us as a volunteer, you can email me to let me know. This way I won't keep pestering you. You also have it's here, and you also have my email from when I sent you this link, and probably many other communications from me. Feel free to take a couple days to think on it, or message me right after this to say, yes, I'd like to move forward. Like I said, I'll send around a trauma-informed care training that you should feel free to watch on your own time. It's a pre-recorded presentation that I think is really valuable for any questions you may have about working with vulnerable populations. And I hope may ease any anxieties you have as well. We have an additional training also pre-recorded that I'll send around to anyone interested in working as an interpreter or a translator. provides a lot more valuable information. Once you've emailed me, I will message you back to schedule a one-on-one call with either myself or another one of our volunteer services staff, probably a 15 to 20-minute phone conversation. Because we're very often matching volunteers and clients for a one-on-one partnership, we really like to get to know our volunteers a little bit better, hear about your background, hear about your interests, also answer any questions you have. And once we know a little bit more about you, we're better equipped to match you with one of our clients. So we'll have that phone call. We'll take a look at our incoming requests for mentorship, for English tutoring, conversation partnership, etc., for our clients. And then we play matchmaker, send you an email or a text or a call, depending on how you like to be in touch, to tell you a little bit more about that client. If you're interested then in moving forward, and I realize this is a lot of steps, but hopefully, once we get the ball rolling, it all moves pretty quickly. We are required to background check all of our volunteers. That is, I believe, $26 now for a background check. If that is a major financial barrier for you, please be in touch. But that's comes back pretty quickly. We never usually have any issues, but we're required to background check our volunteers before we put them in touch with clients. We send that confidentiality agreement, and then we schedule a first meeting, which a volunteer services staff member will join to facilitate that conversation, make sure you both feel comfortable and off to a good start. We'll send you a volunteer agreement with a little bit more information to really clarify what your role is that you can refer to if you ever have questions. And then you start working together. Our tutors and mentors typically work with their clients, mentees, students for about 5 months. Sometimes it ends earlier if people have things that come up, but typically it's 5 months. And some volunteers and clients continue meeting long after that just because it's meaningful to both parties. And like I said, one of our staff members will check in with you typically after about 2 weeks of you working together, and then periodically every few weeks after that, just to make sure everything is going well and that we're offering any support that you need.